Beside me, my mother sat rigid, her spine straight as a ruler, her expression carved from stone. Not a tear rolled down her cheek. Her composure was almost frightening, as though she had trained herself her entire life never to show weakness. I wanted her to take my hand, to whisper that we would get through this together, but she didn't. She just stared ahead, detached, unyielding. The priest spoke of loss, of eternal rest, of peace after suffering, but his words washed over me without meaning. The choir sang, voices trembling with emotion, and I tried to join in but couldn't force sound past the lump in my throat. My heart was too heavy to sing. And then, when the service ended and people began to shuffle toward the exit, it happened. A man I had never seen before, dressed in a dark suit and carrying a solemn expression, approached me. His presence was calm but deliberate, as though he had been waiting for this moment. Without a word at first, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting, familiar, shaky, but unmistakable. "Your father wanted you to have this," the man said softly. His eyes lingered on mine for a moment. Then he placed the envelope carefully into my hands before walking away, disappearing into the crowd. I froze, staring down at it. My heart pounded so violently I could hear it in my ears. The paper felt warm against my skin, heavier than it should have been, as though it carried not just words, but something far greater. For a long moment I couldn't move. My throat tightened, my chest ached, and I clutched the envelope to me like it was the last piece of him I had left. I thought it would be a message of love, a father's final goodbye, maybe even advice for my future. But deep inside, something darker stirred. A whisper that told me this letter was not going to bring comfort. It was going to change everything. И когда я выходил из церкви с горящим конвертом в руке, я еще не осознавал, что его открытие разрушит всю мою жизнь, разрушив саму правду о том, кем я себя считал. The letter continued. I cannot tell you everything, Anna. Some truths are not mine to share, but know this. I have loved you more fiercely than any man could ever love a child. Nothing changes that. You are my daughter, always. But if you wish to know who your real father is, you will have to ask your mother. She holds the answers I could not give. My tears blurred the ink until the words swam on the page. I wanted to throw the letter away, to pretend I hadn't read it, to cling to the belief that the man we had just buried was, and always would be, my only father. But the seed had been planted, a truth I could no longer ignore. The last lines of the letter were the ones that broke me completely. Please don't hate me for this. I wanted you to live your life free from this burden, but I could not leave without giving you the choice to know. Whatever you decide to do with this truth, remember one thing. My love for you has never been a lie. I lowered the letter to my lap, sobbing openly now. The sound swallowed by the falling rain. My hands clutched the paper as though it were the only thing tethering me to reality. At that moment, the man I had called my father became both more and less than I had ever known. He was the man who raised me, who loved me, but also a man who had carried a secret so large it redefined my very existence. And as the rain poured harder, one thought echoed relentlessly in my mind. If he wasn't my real father, then who was? Какая-то часть меня хотела броситься вниз по лестнице и закричать на нее, требовать ответов, заставлять ее объяснять, как она могла так со мной поступить. Но другая часть меня была в ужасе. Что если правда, которую она считала, была еще хуже, чем то, что написал мой отец? Что если знание о том, кто мой биологический отец, только еще больше потрясет меня? I clutched the letter in my hand. Its paper crumpled from how tightly I'd been holding it since leaving the cemetery. My chest ached, as though someone had hollowed it out. The grief of losing my father had been unbearable already, but now it was laced with something darker, something heavier, betrayal. I walked past my mother without a word, climbed the stairs to my bedroom, and shut the door. I couldn't face her. Not yet. Not when I knew she had been part of this lie my entire life. Inside my room, I sat on the edge of my bed and spread the letter across my lap again, The words blurred as I read them over and over, as if repetition might somehow change them, soften them, turn them into something less destructive. But no matter how many times my eyes scanned the page, the truth didn't change. He wasn't my father. He, the man I had mourned, the man I had loved, the man who had kissed my forehead every night as a child, he wasn't the one whose blood ran through my veins. It felt as though someone had stolen my childhood from me. Every memory I had of him was now painted with a shadow. I kept asking myself, was it real? Did he truly love me? Or was he pretending all along? The letter said his love was never a lie, but in that moment it was hard to believe anything. Lies had been the foundation of my life. Anger flared inside me. I thought of my mother sitting downstairs in silence, holding on to secrets like they were her oxygen. How many times had she looked me in the eyes and called me our daughter, knowing the truth? How many times had she let me believe in a family story that was nothing but fiction? A part of me wanted to storm down the stairs and scream at her, to demand answers, to force her to explain how she could do this to me. But another part of me was terrified. What if the truth she held was even worse than what my father had written? What if knowing who my biological father was only shattered me further? The hours dragged on. I paced my room, tears streaking my face, fists clenching and unclenching as if I could fight the weight pressing down on my chest. I felt like I was suffocating. My world, once small and secure, had cracked open into something vast and unfamiliar. Every little thing in my room became a reminder of the lie. The framed photo of my dad and me at my high school graduation, his proud arm around my shoulders, now seemed tainted. The teddy bear he gave me when I was 5, the one I still kept on my shelf, suddenly felt like a prop in someone else's story. Finally, as the night grew darker and the silence of the house became unbearable, I whispered aloud to myself, "Why didn't you just tell me?" The words echoed in the emptiness of my room, a question meant for both of them, for the father I had just buried and the mother who sat downstairs, hiding in her silence. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't keep running from it. The grief, the anger, the betrayal, they were all leading me to one inevitable confrontation. If my mother held the rest of the truth, then she was the only one who could give me back the pieces of my shattered identity. And whether I was ready or not, I had to face her. For 2 days, I avoided my mother. The letter burned inside me like a secret I couldn't carry, but I wasn't ready to face her yet. Every time I walked through the house, I felt her eyes on me, cool and unyielding, as though she could sense the questions building inside me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't try to comfort me. She just let the silence grow heavier between us, like a wall neither of us wanted to cross. But I couldn't hold it in any longer. On the 3rd night after the funeral, I came downstairs and found her sitting in the living room. The curtains were drawn, the lights dim, and she was perched on the edge of her chair with a glass of wine in her hand. She looked exhausted, though she'd never admit it, her hair pinned too tightly, her posture stiff, her face pale under the soft glow of the lamp. I stood in the doorway for a long time, clutching the folded letter in my hand. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "Mom," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "We need to talk." She looked up slowly, her eyes tired but steady. "About what?" I walked forward, my heart pounding, and dropped the letter onto the coffee table between us. She didn't even flinch when she saw it. Instead, she took a slow sip of wine and said flatly, "So you opened it." Her calmness infuriated me. Of course I opened it. He was my father, and he left this for me. What did you expect me to do? Pretend it didn't exist? She set her glass down carefully, her expression unreadable. "I expected you to trust that we had our reasons." I felt my hands ball into fists. Reasons. To lie to me my whole life? To let me believe I was his daughter when I wasn't? My voice broke, the weight of betrayal spilling out with every word. "You should have told me the truth, Mom." I deserved to know who I am. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she would stay silent. But then she sighed, the sound heavy, almost defeated. "You are his daughter," she said softly. In every way that matters, you are his. He raised you. He loved you. That's more important than biology. That's not the point, I snapped, tears stinging my eyes. You let me live a lie. You built my entire life on a secret. And now he's gone, and the only person who can tell me the rest of the truth is you. So stop hiding. Tell me who my real father is. Her eyes flickered with something, fear, maybe, or pain, but she quickly masked it with that same hard composure she always carried. She reached for her glass again, her hand trembling ever so slightly. You don't want to know, she whispered. Yes, I do, I insisted, my voice shaking. I need to know. I can't keep living in the dark. Please, Mom, who is he? Her silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the floor as if she couldn't bear to look at me. Your biological father, she began slowly, her voice hoarse, is not the kind of man you want to find. He wasn't someone I could keep in your life without destroying you. That's why your father, the only real father you ever had, stepped in. He wanted to protect you from the truth my breath caught. My chest tightened. So he's alive? I whispered. He's still out there. Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying. My mother wasn't just hiding the truth to protect me. She was hiding it to protect herself. My mother's silence lingered in the air like smoke, suffocating and impossible to escape. I sat across from her, my pulse racing, waiting for her to say something, anything. But she just stared at the floor, her hands curled tightly around her wineglass, knuckles pale. Finally, I broke the silence. You can't keep doing this. You can't just bury the truth and expect me to live with it. I have a right to know who he is. Her eyes flickered up to mine, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her gaze. Not the kind of fear that comes from danger, but the kind that comes from remembering something you've spent your entire life trying to forget. Your biological father, she began slowly, was not the man you've imagined. He wasn't kind. He wasn't safe. He wasn't good. She swallowed hard, her voice faltering. When I was young, I made a mistake. I let myself be swept into a world I didn't belong to, and he was the reason I leaned forward, my nails digging into my palms. What world? Her lips pressed into a thin line before she finally whispered the word, crime. The room seemed to tilt around me. Crime? She nodded, her eyes glassy now. He was dangerous, Anna. Charismatic, yes, he could make anyone believe in him, but underneath, he was violent, controlling, and involved with people you never wanted to cross. By the time I realized how deep I was in, I was already pregnant with you. My stomach turned. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. So you lied? Because you were ashamed? Her expression hardened, the steel returning to her voice. I lied because I wanted to protect you. I didn't want you growing up carrying his shadow. Your father? She paused, her voice breaking just slightly on the word. The man we buried. He loved you enough to step in and give you a life that man never could. He swore to me that he'd raise you as his own, and he did. He gave you stability, safety, love. That's what mattered. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. But you should have told me. Don't you see? Now I feel like I don't even know who I am. Everything I thought was true. It's all a lie. My mother reached across the table suddenly, her hand covering mine. It was the first time she had touched me since the funeral, and it startled me. Her grip was firm, almost desperate. You are my daughter, she said fiercely. Not his. Nothing in your blood defines you. The man who raised you, that's the only father you need to claim. Her words were meant to comfort me, but they only made the ache worse. Because now I knew the truth. Somewhere out there, the man who gave me half my identity still existed. And while my mother wanted me to erase him from my story, I couldn't. I had to know more. Where is he now? I asked softly. Her hand recoiled instantly, her eyes flashing with panic. Don't ask that. Don't even think about it. If you go looking for him, you'll only find pain. He is not the kind of man you can invite into your life, Anna. Some doors are better left closed, but her warning only fueled the fire inside me. Because now I had confirmation. He was alive. Somewhere out there, my real father was living his life while I sat here drowning in questions. And no matter how much my mother begged me to leave it alone, I knew I couldn't. The past was calling me, and I was already listening. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning in endless circles. Every word from my mother replayed in my head like a broken record. Dangerous, violent, crime. Don't look for him. But the more she told me to stay away, the more determined I became. If this man was truly as terrible as she claimed, then why had she hidden him instead of confronting the truth years ago? Why had she let me live in ignorance, building my entire life on a false foundation? My chest tightened with frustration, with grief, with the overwhelming need to know who I really was. By morning, I had made my decision. I had to find him. I started small. I pulled out my father's, no, the man I thought was my father's, old boxes of papers from the attic. Most of them were tax returns, medical journals, and family photographs. But tucked inside a folder at the bottom of the stack was something that caught my eye. A faded envelope addressed to my mother, dated around the time she would have been pregnant with me. The handwriting wasn't my father's. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short, hurried note. You know I can't stay. But one day, maybe she'll come looking for me. Tell her the truth, if you ever find the courage. There was no signature, just two initials scrawled at the bottom. DM. I sat on the floor of the attic, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. DM. Whoever he was real. Not just a shadow from my mother's past. He had known about me. He had left a trace, however small. I needed more. Over the next week, I poured myself into research like it was oxygen. I searched public records, old newspaper archives, anything that might connect those initials to a man involved in crime decades ago. I combed through court documents late at night, my laptop glowing in the dark, my coffee going cold beside me. Each time I found a lead, my pulse raced with hope, only to crash when it turned into a dead end. Still, little by little, a picture began to form. There had been a man with those initials, Daniel Marks, arrested in the late 1980s for racketeering, suspected ties to an organized crime syndicate in the city. The charges never stuck. He slipped through the cracks of the justice system again and again, until eventually his name vanished from the public record. It had to be him. I sat at my desk, staring at his name on the screen, whispering it under my breath like it was a spell. Daniel Marks. The man who gave me half my DNA. The man my mother wanted me to forget. But knowing his name wasn't enough. I needed to see him. I needed to hear his voice. I needed answers to questions that had been haunting me since the funeral. Who was he, really? Why had he left? And most of all, what did it mean for me? Every instinct told me to tread carefully. If my mother was right about his connections, this wasn't a man I could just call on the phone. It would take digging, patience, and maybe a risk I wasn't ready for, but my desperation was stronger than my fear. I reached out to a friend from college, someone who owed me a favor and happened to work as a private investigator. I explained my situation carefully, omitting some details but giving enough to make it sound urgent. He hesitated, warned me this could get messy, but in the end, he agreed to help me track him down. As I hung up the phone, a strange mixture of dread and exhilaration washed over me. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to step into a world I had never known existed. I didn't tell my mother what I was doing. I couldn't. She would try to stop me, maybe even destroy the evidence I had found. So I carried this secret alone, clinging to the letter, the initials, and the name that now echoed in my mind. Daniel Marks, my real father. And whether he wanted me to find him or not, I was already on his trail. The investigator I had contacted, David, didn't waste much time. Within a few days, he called me back with a voice that carried both caution and intrigue. "I've been digging into your guy, Anna," he said. "If this really is the same Daniel Marks, then he was clever. He covered his tracks well, but nobody disappears completely. There's always something left behind." My pulse quickened. "What did you find?" David hesitated. "First, let me warn you. This man wasn't just a small-time criminal. His name shows up in FBI files, old police reports, even whispers in newspapers from 25 years ago. Loan sharking, illegal gambling rings, suspected extortion. Nothing pinned to him directly, but everyone knew he was pulling strings." I gripped the phone tighter. Hearing it out loud made the knot in my stomach twist even tighter. "And now?" "Now," David said slowly. "It looks like he vanished in the late 90s, but I traced a property deed that matches someone with his initials. Same age range, same city ties. A small house out in a rural area, about 2 hours from here. It's listed under an alias, but I'd bet good money it's him." I couldn't breathe. "My real father, alive, within driving distance," David continued, his voice lowering. "I don't recommend going alone. If he's really who I think he is, he might not welcome visitors, especially family. Men like this don't retire peacefully. They carry their past with them. But I had already made up my mind." That night, I sat in my room staring at a map. The address David had given me circled in red. A small town I had never been to. A place so ordinary it seemed impossible that it could hold the key to my entire identity. I thought about my mother's warning, her pale face, the tremble in her voice when she told me to stay away. And for the first time, I wondered if she had been right to fear him. But curiosity was stronger than caution. The next morning, I packed a bag, tossed it into the trunk of my car, and started the drive. The city melted away into long stretches of highway, the skyline shrinking behind me. Fields and forests blurred past, each mile carrying me further from the life I had always known and closer to the truth I had been chasing since the funeral. The silence in the car was deafening. My thoughts spun in endless circles. What would I say if I saw him? Would he even admit who he was? Would he slam the door in my face? Would he deny me? And beneath it all, the most terrifying question of all, what if he really was a monster? What if meeting him destroyed whatever fragile memory of my father I had left? I tightened my grip on the wheel, forcing myself to breathe. No matter how much it scared me, I couldn't turn back now. I needed to see him with my own eyes. The closer I got to the town, the heavier the air seemed to feel, as though the past itself was waiting for me. Every road sign, every bend in the road felt like it was guiding me not just to a house, but to the truth I had been denied for my entire life. By the time I reached the outskirts of that quiet town, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the streets. My GPS beeped, announcing I was less than 5 minutes away. My chest tightened, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the sound of the engine. I was about to meet the man who had given me half of who I was, and nothing would ever be the same. The road narrowed as I left the small town behind. Streetlights disappeared, replaced by towering trees whose branches arched overhead like a tunnel. My headlights carved through the growing darkness, illuminating gravel, fallen leaves, and the occasional mailbox leaning at awkward angles. Each mile made the air heavier, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Finally, the GPS chimed. "You have arrived at your destination." I slowed to a crawl. On the left side of the road stood a weathered 2-story house with peeling paint, sagging shutters, and a rusted fence half swallowed by weeds. The place looked abandoned, like no one had touched it in decades. Yet, in one of the upstairs windows, a faint light flickered, a lamp, steady and deliberate. Someone lived here. My chest tightened. I pulled over to the side of the road and sat there for what felt like an eternity. My hands gripped the steering wheel, clammy and trembling. This was it, the end of my search, the moment I had been chasing since the funeral. Just beyond that rusted gate, behind those cracked walls, was the man my mother had feared and hated, the man my father had replaced. I tried to rehearse what I would say. "Hi, my name is Anna. I think you're my father. You don't know me, but I know about you." The words sounded foolish, fragile against the weight of this moment. How do you walk into someone's life after decades and demand answers? I thought of my mother's warning, her voice echoing, "Don't look for him. Some doors are better left closed." And yet, here I was, sitting at that very door, about to knock. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint creak of the old fence swinging back and forth. I took a deep breath, shoved the car door open, and stepped out. Gravel crunched under my shoes as I approached the gate. The metal was cold, rough against my palm as I pushed it open. It groaned loudly, announcing my arrival to whoever was inside. The yard was a mess of overgrown grass and broken furniture. A rusted swing set leaned dangerously to one side, its chains squealing as the wind pushed it back and forth. Every step toward the front porch felt like walking deeper into another world, one my mother had desperately tried to keep me from. The front door was heavy wood, its paint chipped and curling. I raised my hand to knock, but froze. My reflection stared back at me in the small glass panel. A pale face, wide eyes, lips pressed tightly together. For a moment I didn't recognize myself. My heart hammered. Then, before I could knock, the door creaked open. A shadow filled the frame. An older man stood there, tall and broad, his shoulders still carrying the weight of strength despite his age. His face was weathered, lines etched deep into his skin, his eyes sharp and searching. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Anna," he said, his voice gravelly, certain, as though he had been expecting me all along. The sound of my name on his lips sent chills down my spine. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The man standing in the doorway looked both familiar and foreign, as though some piece of his face was mirrored in mine. His sharp jawline, the curve of his brow, the way his eyes seemed to pierce straight through me. It was terrifying and magnetic all at once. You know my name," I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his lips, but his eyes never softened. "Of course I do," he said. "I've always known about you." The world tilted beneath me. My throat went dry. "Then why?" my voice cracked. "Why weren't you there? Why did you let me grow up believing someone else was my father?" He leaned against the frame, crossing his arms, his expression unreadable. "Because that's the way your mother wanted it. She made sure I stayed out of your life, and I let her. Maybe she was right." Anger flared in my chest, stronger than fear. "Right? You abandoned me. You let me live a lie. Do you have any idea what it feels like to find out at my father's funeral that the man I loved, the man who raised me, wasn't even my blood?" His gaze hardened, his jaw tightening. "Don't talk about abandonment like you understand it. You think it was easy for me to walk away? You think I didn't want to be there? Your mother gave me a choice: disappear or ruin your life with the kind of man I was. So I disappeared. That was my way of protecting you." I shook my head violently, tears burning my eyes. "Protecting me? Protecting yourself. That's what this was. You didn't want responsibility. You didn't want to face me." For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Pain, regret, something human beneath the cold exterior. But it was gone in an instant. "Maybe you're right," he muttered. "But you're here now, which means you're not satisfied with the story your mother gave you." "You want the truth?" "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "I want everything. No more secrets, no more lies. I need to know who you really are." He studied me for a long time, his silence heavy, the weight of decades pressing down on both of us. Finally, he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Then come in," he said, "but you'd better be ready. The truth isn't as simple as you think, and once you hear it, you can't go back to the life you had before." I stood frozen on the porch, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echo in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to turn back, to escape before it was too late. But something deeper, something inside me, pushed me forward. I stepped across the threshold. The house smelled of old wood, tobacco, and dust. The walls were lined with bookshelves stuffed with yellowed papers, photographs, and objects that looked both valuable and dangerous. A single lamp cast shadows across the room, giving everything a dim, secretive glow. He motioned for me to sit. I lowered myself onto an old leather chair, my legs trembling beneath me. He poured himself a drink, his hands steady, his movements practiced. Then he sat across from me, leaning forward, eyes fixed on mine. "You want the truth?" he said again, his voice low, steady, almost menacing. "Then you'll have it. But understand this, Anna. Once I start talking, your world will never be the same." The room was silent except for the ticking of an old clock on the mantel. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I'm ready," I whispered, even though I wasn't sure I meant it. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing, and finally spoke. "Your mother told you pieces of the story, but she never told you who I really was, and why she was so desperate to keep you from me.